Welcome back to Inside Great Minds. My name is Adam Outland. This is the podcast and show where we interview top performers, CEOs, leaders, executives, authors, and otherwise people successful at their craft and better understanding how they think, make decisions, and what their operating principles are to do what they've done. And this episode that we have today for you is actually a really, really awesome one, in particular because the people I had the opportunity to interview actually have made it their profession to work on the decision-making and thinking of people. So I'll introduce you here to Matt Kursh is our first guest. And we're also simultaneously on the same podcast episode, I'm interviewing L Keaney. Matt is the co-founder and CEO of Oji Life Lab. Matt's career, he's spanned technology companies, personal and corporate learning and development, and the nonprofit sector. He had started a few different companies that he sold to Apple and Microsoft, respectively. He served as the CEO of Blue Planet Run, a running relay that circled the globe over 95 days to raise awareness for global water crisis. And then he began a career as a president and co-founder of a software company, Clearview Software, which he sold to Apple Computers. So he co-founded eShop Corporation. That was another company that was in the software and online service platform. eShop was acquired by Microsoft. And then he served as GM for Microsoft's MSN.com, as well as Sidewalk and Home Advisor. So currently, Matt's role is running Oji Life Lab. And this is where he has taken some of his passions, where prior he had actually went down a learning venture working with teens on soft skills and creating programs on essential topics like decision-making, personality, purpose, and values. So obviously, Matt and I got along really well because that is a big project I have. And building our student coaching division is exactly in alignment with what Matt's background was. And then our second guest on the same episode is Dr. L Keaney. He is an international recognized thought leader, both in the scientific and a scientific and academic partner of Oji Life Lab. So this is really neat. Dr. Keaney literally has made it his career to study decision-making and decision sciences. He's professor emeritus at Duke School of Business. He's a professor emeritus of industrial and system engineering at the University of Southern California. So I think you're going to learn a lot from him as the author of Give Yourself a Nudge. I had a chance to scan through and read some really interesting sections of the book, a really academic and scientific approach to decision-making. And then Matt, his story, and then the business he's formed to help take these principles of decision-making, these systems of decision-making, and make it applicable and a tool that people can use to improve. So I think you're going to love the episode. I think there's a lot of little sound bites. I'm really excited because a big part of my mission is to impact the decision-making of people through this podcast and through the businesses I work in as well. So hopefully you get as excited as I do. Hopefully you pick out some great sound bites, and this is helpful and resourceful for you as well. My number one question of interest was to actually find out how you guys even found your way down this path. Matt, I read your bio of, building basically, tech companies and selling them to Apple and Microsoft. And, for the layman like myself, that seems a world apart from, maybe what you do today, but obviously there's a lot of crossover. So if you don't mind, maybe sharing how you kind of found this passion for starting Oji Life Lab and a little bit of your story, that would be great.
Sure. I think some people get into business because they love business for business itself. And while I do enjoy the business part of business, I think for me, mostly it's a creative itch, what I do. And so the two companies I started came out of a creative itch of recognizing that there was some kind of opportunity, something lacking. With Oji as a business, as I got into my early 40s and was, been married for a little while, had young kids, sat on company boards, ran a nonprofit, so worked in a lot of different spheres. I just really increasingly felt like the key ideas, the key skills, the key habits that I needed to succeed were things like decision making or emotional intelligence or understanding one's purpose and values, and that these were things that were driving how good my life was and how much I got done, but nobody had really taught me. And so that was another problem I saw. And I've been working in this area now for 10 years in different ways, and met up with some great co-founders and funded Oji Life Lab 4 years ago. And then after working on emotional intelligence, we decided that the next key thing we did do at Oji does digital life skills training that happens on your phone. And we said, what's the next thing we want to do? We want to do decision making. And as it turned out, my favorite book on decision making was Smart Choices, and Ralph was a co-author of that. And I was shocked to find out that he lived in San Francisco, and turns out his office is walking distance from our office. And some decision making is very analytical, but in that case, it was kind of just kind of obvious, like, oh my gosh, if Ralph is free, we got to work with him. And fortunately he was. So that would lead us to being here today, and being so excited to be able to offer something that helps people with decision making.
Yeah, wonderful. And yeah, so the connection with Ralph was just kind of just a Google search, and he popped up on your radar locally.
Yeah, I mean, I was sitting at the same computer I'm at right now in the same place, and I remember there's three co-authors on Smart Choices, and it turns out Ralph was in San Francisco, and I sent him a cold email, and I think, Ralph, you responded within an hour.
Yeah.
It was like he was waiting.
Well, in the email, interestingly enough, if I recall correctly, said, because was a professor at Duke for a while and emeritus there, and thought I was there, and said, we'd be willing to come and meet you at Duke. And I looked up where they were located, and I wrote back and said, I'd be very happy to have a meeting, but I can walk to your office in 15 minutes. So you don't need to come to Duke.
That's amazing. Yeah.
That was an easy decision.
Yeah, easy decision. Yeah, and Ralph, you had I was reading your book here that you guys were kind enough to send over, and then just did a little homework there too. And yet you've got a string of them. I think dating back quite some time that you've started your research on this topic. Can you share a little bit about how you arrived into the scene of studying the art and science of making decisions, and when you started publishing?
Sure. I actually think my feelings and emotions toward wanting to do that was very early. I wanted to be free in life, which meant to do what I would like, when I would like, and everything. And kind of fortunately had a wonderful mother, and other people were pretty nice in the little town I grew up in Montana. And I realized decision making is the way you can influence your life. That's it. And nowadays, I'd say the only purposeful way you can influence anything in your life is through your decisions. The rest just happens through actions of others and happenstance. COVID was happenstance. And if your boss or has a requirement, that influences you. If your child gets sick, it influences you. And certainly you have to react to all of those things. But so I was interested in decisions, and then became an engineer in college. And when I then went to MIT for grad school, you look for topics to write on. And unlike some people who are looking for one topic, can I just find a topic I can write on? And they'll take anything that just meets the lowest standard because they're panicked. I'd ask them for 3 or 4 topics, everybody I talked to, and one mentioned decision making. And that just appealed to me. I didn't know was overly a topic that you studied. And what also appealed is I could have gone into something in computer science. I could program in machine language then. I can't now do anything with them. But I realized if I took a 3-month vacation, I'd be obsolete. any time in the rest of my life. And with decision making, the skill is tied to the evolution of humans, not the evolution of technology. And people were going to get no better in their lifetime than they were when I was making these decisions. So if I had some skills and some ideas that might be helpful, I wouldn't be obsolete. I could take a year's vacation and do something I wanted and come back and be just as relevant. And that has proven out to be the case. The decisions are tougher and humans aren't evolving very quickly. I'm one of those humans.
Yeah. When did you publish your first work on decision making?
Well, the first things were articles, and that's when I first was a master's student at MIT. So I guess in 68 was the first articles, but then edited a book on kind of decisions and operations research management science for public systems like blood banks or transportation systems and things like that. And the first authored book, I guess, was Decisions with Multiple Objectives, which was in 76. And then other things since then on risk and decision making.
That's so interesting. One quick follow-up question to that, and then I want to pivot over to Matt. But how does your vision and your understanding of decision making evolve over? I mean, we're talking 30 plus years, 40 years of working on this topic. What's changed from when you're an MIT student studying this and publishing papers to this recent book, and how has that evolved?
That's a great question. When I went to MIT and you're working, I thought people knew the decisions they wanted to address. They knew the objectives they wanted to achieve. They knew their alternatives. They were the decision maker. They knew all this stuff. So you could go and help them build a model and maybe gather data, and might be mathematical, analytical, and for big companies and things, you can do it and get some insights and help them make decisions. And it turns out, I think I was phenomenally wrong on individuals knew what decisions they ought to address and their objectives and their alternatives. That's the front end, that's qualitative, and they can do it. Most people can't do an analytical back end. They don't need to. They can have somebody else do it if it's important enough. But so it's moved to be on that front end. If somebody works on only part of the decision that they have, or the wrong decision, it's not going to lead to a great outcome for what you'd hope for. It may be sufficient. It will do. But you can do much better in life there. The one other thing that's also qualitative, which is interesting, is people think of decisions as decision problems. Something happens, like the cases I've mentioned, and so, okay, now I got to deal with this one. And they do. But you can never improve your life because a problem lowers your life. You lose your job, you do poor in school, you get sick, anything like that. What you want to do is make decisions to get back to the level you were. But that's not getting better. You're going along like this, and obviously you have experiences like this. It's as you say, great minds. You think, what would I like in life? And that doesn't mean selfish. It could be, what do you want to contribute to others, your family, society? And then the only way you can have any influence there is, well, I need to make some decisions. How can I make things better for whatever it is I care about? So that's a decision opportunity, not a decision problem. And that's a qualitative notion too. And if you can do those four things well, what's your decision you want to address? And so including opportunities, what's your objectives and what's your alternatives? You are way, way ahead. Then the back end, which I originally worked on, is so how do the alternatives measure up and which one is best? And in particular, let's get rid of the real poor ones and maybe create a little better one. So much of the action can be done by about anyone who cares to make their life or somebody else's life better, or their company better.
Yeah, I love that. So, when you guys ended up partnering on decision making, Matt, like having looked at some of the content on decision making that Ralph had published and some of the work he had done, what was it timing wise that made you guys decide this was the next foray for Oji Life Labs after emotional intelligence?
I think we were looking for something that would provide the biggest impact in people's performance in the workplace and their outcomes in life. And, when I say the biggest, there are many really important areas that one could focus on. So I don't want to make it sound like decision making is the one key. But, I've heard Ralph say before something he repeated a few minutes ago, that the only purposeful way you can improve your life is to make a decision. And I know the first time I heard him say that, I thought this was a somewhat overblown statement. And I'm sure he's used to that response. But once you think about it for a second, you realize that's really just what the definition of a decision, which is a purposeful choice. And it's, my co-founder, Andrea Hoban, and I have done some in-person training around decision making. And found that really talented, highly educated, high performance people, nevertheless, when asked to confront a decision, don't really have tools, and they start making things up. And you mentioned earlier that your parents are musicians. I mean, when a musician sees a score, they know how to read the notes, and they know how to perform them, and they understand their instrument, and they understand everything else. But a lot of people, when they're looking at decision, they don't, there is no score, there is no concept, there is no framework. And so they just start doing stuff. And what's been really exciting about the program we've built, which we call OG Decide, is that it takes the model that Ralph just described of understanding what your decision is, being clear about what your objectives are, identifying alternatives, understanding how you're going to measure your outcomes, and then analyzing that. And it creates, habits, just like a musician would have when they come to a performance, so that they don't have to figure out how to make a decision. They know, they have a model in their head, they have a playbook. And so it's really powerful. And just as the case with our emotional intelligence learning program, a lot of the stories we hear are about ways people are using this at work, that they're making better decisions for their business, they're making better decisions in their sales efforts, they're making better decisions in how they treat their employees. But they're also talking about they're making better decisions about their family life, about how to educate their kids, how to navigate COVID. There's a lot of decisions we're confronting right now in history that we didn't have before. I mean, I just had a really interesting Christmas with my wife's family. And, a couple of years ago, we didn't make decisions at Christmas over social distancing and virus testing. That was not stuff we had to think about. And so if you don't have a way to assess those decisions, you're just kind of winging it. And so it's really been exciting to really pull back this curtain on this model that Ralph spent the better part of 50 years clarifying, testing, proving, and researching, so that people can put it in action every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking of so many things as you're, sharing those examples. One of which, in terms of timeliness, is, to me, I mean, the political climate and divisiveness of the country, right? I mean, it's fundamentally, when we 2 years ago started building student coaching, at least in the back of my mind, the urgency behind doing it was, I don't know if we can change a generation of adults, but if we can work with young people and helping them have and be equipped with decision-making principles that allow them to intake information and process it in the most efficient, effective way. I try and stay away from moral goods and bads, but just say the most effective way, that it would fundamentally change a tremendous amount about, our country and how the world operates, right? I mean, Ralph, how often do you find, is this a topic that comes up now with your work and decision-making? A lot of what we're dealing with, the information that's generated online and on the computer, and how we make decisions about what we do with that information. Is that part of what you've?
Well, part of that's descriptively, and I'm more prescriptive, how you should make your decisions if you wish to be consistent with some principles like the three just mentioned. But they're very interrelated. Descriptively, you ask, how did you learn to make decisions? And the fact is, none of us learned the way we normally do. Decision making's a skill. And with most skills, you learn how to do them and then you practice them. I mean, if you take tennis or any musical instrument, the first time you do it, you're probably not too good. And if you took any of those instruments and no one ever told you anything and you just played around, there's a small chance you might be pretty unique and pretty special, but most likely you would have been better had you taken some lessons and then you practice. And you practice on parts of it. Just like, the tennis, the serve, you could do serves and not play a game. But if you only even read books on tennis and never practiced and played 40 times a year, you would stink. And it's the same with decision making relative to what you could do. Everybody can improve in decisions. Certainly I can improve mine. And so I think that's a key part of it. We didn't learn, and what the Oji program has is a great way to help people learn a few principles that could help them tremendously, and practice. There's a lot of that in there. And you want to practice not on your big tough problems because they're too tough. You want to practice on easier decisions that are maybe worth 5 minutes of your thought because it might improve a few hours later, or maybe a few days. If you're taking a weekend vacation, that's worthy of a little thought of, well, we have some options. Let's create some of those alternatives. And then what do we hope to achieve on our vacation?
Yeah.
And just that little bit of thinking can help you sometimes create a much better alternative, better decision, and it's worth the small time. 5 minutes to improve 5 hours is kind of a good investment.
Yeah, and I wanted to.
Procrastination to improve 5 hours is a loser.
Fair. I do want to come back and talk a little bit about some of the steps that you provide too, in terms of uncovering values as a way of helping in decision making is kind of a key component. But I do like to jump around a little bit, and something that a lot of our listeners are interested in, I think, is also just a little bit of your early story too. Matt, when you think about everything you've learned and who you are as an individual today, if we went backwards in time to and I was sitting here interviewing 9th grade Matt. Tell me about 9th grade Matt Kursh. Who is this young man entering high school? What was different about him? What were and I always like a reflective of your growth and development as an individual in this too. And who were you as a high school guy, Matt, and in terms of decisions and focus and everything else?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that, Adam, because I have a son who's a senior in high school who is absolutely his own person. But there are moments when I witness him in action and I think, oh man, I think that was me when I was his age. And it, teenagers are a different species. I think there's some commonalities. I'm no expert on neuroscience, but the prefrontal cortex is not nearly so developed in a 14 or 15-year-old. And, there's a lot of impulsive behavior and strong opinions. And nobody, I think, would say today that I'm unopinionated, but I think I probably backed off some of my vehemence on a lot of ideas and topics. But I do think that the similarities really are there in the sense that even then I was really just driven by these creative impulses. So in high school, my project was my rock band. That was all I really was focused on, and playing guitar. And I had a band, and we played out, and we had a PA, and we did all that stuff. And sometimes I think about it, it's like, wow, we had a 16 channel mixer and a full PA system. How did I pull that off in high school? It was, I don't know. Somehow I got my parents and a bunch of other parents to help chip in so we could do it. So it was always that, I was always kind of driven by that project. And I've been that way, I think, my whole life. And the company I started in college grew out of the fact that I had helped my father, who's now a retired surgeon, but I had helped him try to pick some software to run his medical office on. And in the early 80s, you can imagine how crude that software was. And I just really felt, I kind of got sick of looking at all this bad software. And I finally said to him, Dad, why don't you invest some money and I'll get some of my college buddies and we'll write something better. That project took many twists and turns, but we ended up selling the business to Apple. By then it was not doing software for medical practices, not surprisingly, but that's been pretty consistent for me. So, when you ask me what was my ninth grade self like, I have to say my first instinct is I really don't want to know, because I think I'd probably want to smack them. But probably some good stuff paid off in time.
I think it was a great answer. I mean, it's interesting to see the evolution of values from what we value as a ninth grader. And then to your point, you look at, our kids and, the distance that we've traveled since we've been their age. And we're like, oh my gosh, this is what they value. How is it going to turn out in 20 to 30 years? So, Ralph, maybe you comment on that too. What are values and how do they, I know you don't necessarily specifically talk about the evolution maybe over time with people's values, but how do you identify values? And how does that play a role in decision making?
Well, I should mention that I don't think there's a unique definition for values. And so, at least in what I write, I say it's anything you care about regarding a decision. Because a key thing to help somebody make a decision is get anything in their mind out that's relevant to it. And I don't want them to limit their thinking and think, well, is this a value? And they're thinking about something that's important and they think, no, that isn't. And then they don't tell me and they don't recognize it as well. So I say a value is anything you care about regarding a particular decision. That's the way I define it. And so once you get anything written down that they care about, asking many, many different ways, then you can begin to make some sense out of them to, okay, are there any objectives you have with respect to this value, this value, this value? So that's what I think of for values. It's just a real general point. It's crucial and it's why you care. And it's basically foundation for why a decision's even worthwhile. If you had no values, don't spend any time on it. Anything that happens kind of equivalent.
Yeah. You maybe correct me or direct me in a different way here, but I think that there's a maturity of understanding certain values that occurs over time. And what I mean by that, just from the coaching work that I've done or just in self-reflection and thinking about decision-making, the confusion and untangling of certain things that we might mistake as a value. So for example, if we're envisioning what we want in our future, someone might say, I want a 2-story, house in San Francisco with a white picket fence, 2 kids and a dog. And we think that that's the decision of what we want. But then we arrive there and, there's some dissatisfaction, even though we got exactly what we physically pictured in that. And that dissatisfaction can, I think, sometimes be attributed to the fact that why we visually saw this 2-story house and a white picket fence, the underlying value was something else, security, family, status, right? And I've found, I guess, just in limited experience that people struggle to identify what's underneath the visual image of what they think they want sometimes. What are your thoughts around that, Ralph?
You're absolutely right. And my thoughts are on page 189.
Oh, perfect. One moment.
And what that is, that's why I'm glancing to find the page. That's the objectives of my life. That's based on the most important values. I think, what do I want out of life and to offer to myself, to others, the company, whoever in life? And they're all listed down there generally. So anything I do or any decision I make, either way, should, in a sense, be trying to pursue some of these.
Mm-hmm.
And there are 4, I call them strategic objectives of my life. Enjoy life, be intellectually fulfilled, have enriching experiences. 5. Enhance the lives of family and friends and contribute to society. Now, so that's the end of all of these that lead to that. Fun and excitement and enjoyment and doing interesting things get there. And some people, and this is all written up in there, will say, well, the most important thing to me is my health. And if I had great health, but I had no fun, no enjoyment, no friends, I'm nothing. But health is crucial, because if I had fantastically poor health, I could have nothing else that I wanted. I couldn't. But it's a means, and even the distinctions between things like that and money, the 3 means that I think modern people need, I figured, for me at least, health, financial well-being, and time. If I don't have any of those 3, I can't have a life.
Mm-hmm.
At the real extreme, you do need some, and time is a little more ambiguous. The person who, the song, I'm sure Matt knows this, about the kid who asks his dad if he wants to do something. Well, I'm too busy now, and he's 5, and then he asks at 15, and he's too busy now, and then he asks when he's and then he says later, because he's busy at work, and then he's 65 or 68, so he asks his 25-year-old if he'd like to do something. Is no, I'm too busy now, basically, is what the song does. And that's the not have time, but it's clear on what poor health or no funds are. And you kind of want those things because they lead to others. So anyway, page 189 has in the material around it more than you'd probably want on that, but it's worthwhile to think, what do I hope to have in the rest of my life?
Yeah.
And it doesn't change.
There's something I recently saw that kind of relates to this too. I was curious of your thoughts around. It's a Japanese expression of finding the most meaningful work. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think I know what you're talking about. It's what I've been thinking of while we're talking about, which is there's this expression of, when it comes to values or explanations, is to ask why 5 times. I don't know if that's what you're thinking of, but I think that's the kind of technique that we teach in the program. And so, to go back to your example of, I want a 2-story house in San Francisco with a white picket fence. Ask why 5 times. Why do you want a white picket fence? Mm-hmm. And this beautiful house? Well, because I love San Francisco architecture. Well, why do you love San Francisco architecture? And to keep digging down till you find out that what you're really looking for is um, a place that feels safe and nurturing for your family. Or maybe it's a place that is visually exciting. Or maybe it's a place that is close to activities that make you feel alive. But you really want to get away from that surface description of what you're looking for, which is, a 1930s Victorian, to really get to those underlying motivators. And those are the values that then you can translate into objectives. And as you can imagine, Adam, I'm sure you've seen it in your life, you can skip those steps, and then you have to accept that your decisions aren't going to really match what you want that much, because like that old saying, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. If you don't know what your decisions values are, you're probably not going to pick the choice that matches what's in your best interest. So building the muscles to do that are key. And I will tell you that really smart, really capable people often nevertheless find it pretty tricky to do the work to uncover what the answers are to these things, because modern society seeks to answer it for us through things like advertising and the media and social norms, and those shorthands get in the way of us really asking the question and finding out for ourselves what matters.
Really, really well said. It reminds me of being in 8th grade. I was on a road trip to Colorado with my mom, and she asked me, it's this downtime. Sometimes it's really meaningful, right? Because you're preoccupied and you're kind of forced into a conversation to go deeper. And she was like, Adam, we haven't talked in a while about this. What do you want to do when you grow up? And I was like, be an opera singer, of course, And she's like, wait, what? She's like, you haven't done choir? Like you haven't done anything related to like studying voice. You've never expressed this to me or your dad. Like, where did this come from? I was like, well, it's just what you guys did. And she's like, well, why? And I was like, well, the travel was really cool, traveling with you and dad and seeing the world. And she's like, okay, well, what else? And I was like, well, the respect that people had for you, for the work that you did on stage and how you impacted them emotionally. But I never brought up music or singing.
Yeah.
In that. And so that, to your point, the why, asking why enough to land on the true intention behind it, was really effective in that conversation for me, because it led her to go, Adam, there's a lot of careers that allow you to travel, that allow you to have an impact emotionally on people, that don't involve you getting on stage and singing in Italian.
Right. And by identifying those values, what you do is create really the inspiration for generating the alternatives that could meet it. And so if your default is, well, my parents are opera singers, so I'm going to be an opera singer, you're considering one alternative. But when you start saying, I like travel, I like to entertain audiences, I like this, that, then all of a sudden, a whole world of possibilities opens up, which is another skill to develop, is how to generate alternatives. And as Ralph often says, if for instance, you're considering decision and you have 3 alternatives, and you can generate one new alternative that ends up being superior to those other 3, you've just massively upgraded your decision outcome because you came up with a better alternative. So I haven't heard you sing, but it seems like for yourself anyways, you generated some other alternatives that worked out a lot better than being an opera singer.
Yeah. And she also provided a value, which is, inherent. And then I questioned later and came to the conclusion of, which is, you can do what you love that has an impact and you can make money. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And, a lot of these conversations are meaningful for young people in particular, because we don't know. Right. And we to societal norms form opinions based on things that aren't necessarily accurate for ourselves. So yeah, I love what you guys are sharing and the work that you're doing there. So Ralph, in the partnership with Matt, how does Oji Lab take these concepts and help equip people in an interactive way to improve this decision-making muscle? I don't know if you call it a muscle, but it's the impression I get.
Matt could probably answer that much better because he's been there since the very, very beginning. But one of the things I think, there's a section here about creating values and everything. One of the best things, where to start, I say, emotions and feelings. They matter, because why do you care about a decision? Some people want to make objective decisions. Stupidest thing ever, if it's got the technical meaning that's kind of, it's only based on the facts. You make decisions because you care about them. They're based on your emotions and feelings. And I think a lot of the general thinking about how to improve these things is similar for emotional intelligence and for decision making. And the reasons is partly the same. Just like no one ever learned how to make decisions, no one particularly learned how to be emotionally intelligent. We just pick some things up, and some of them are pretty good and some of them are pretty bad. And Matt's heard me mention that the decision-making technique picked up from very young age. You're a couple days old and you're hungry, so you got a decision. You don't even know you have one, and what do? You holler. That's the only thing you can do, and you probably get fed. A few hours later, you're wet. You holler, you get dealt with by a nice parent. Once that technique's worked 5,000 times, some people never improve from it. This is the best way to make decisions there is. Decision problem, holler. And you probably know some people, kind of young people, like in your age groups, they get upset and they holler, and somebody will come and take care of them because they just don't want them to holler anymore. So it does work. But a little maybe off the track, I think the ideas of decision-making and emotional intelligence, that we didn't study them, we didn't learn them in a systematic way, we picked them up, are very similar, and they're quite interrelated, because what reason to care about decisions is your emotions and feelings. And so Matt probably knows a much better answer how it is taught, because I think they do a great job. I'm somewhat aware, but certainly not like he.
Yeah.
To clarify that or flesh that out, Adam, the way to think about our labs. So we have OG Emotions, which is a emotional intelligence learning program, and OG Decide. And they're essentially taking our expert partners' decades of research and turning them into a program where over about 3 months, you work on your phone about 10 minutes a day at whatever pace you want. It's totally up to you. And you're getting the practice that Ralph was talking about, and you're getting the engagement so that you can do the personal inquiry to understand what, for instance, in decision-making matters to you. So Ralph has the chart in the book he was just talking about. Not everybody knows how they would fill out their own chart of what their personal values are. And not everybody is fluent so that when they're looking at, let's say, a business decision, I'm trying to close a sale with a client. Okay, what are my objectives? What are my values? Am I trying to generate revenue? Am I trying to secure a long-term relationship with the client? Am I trying to elevate my value to my firm? What are the balance of those things? Therefore, what are the alternatives? People don't automatically know that. And so our program works through these little 10 or 15 minute steps where you can build that muscle over time. And, there's this notion of spaced repetition, which is decades old concept, very hard to do in a classroom setting, but very easy to do when you're walking around with a smartphone. And so that's why our program over time helps you really build those muscles. And then what's really special, I think, about the program is that it includes live learning sessions where you actually do interact with other learners and our coaches. And so you get to ask questions and do role plays and other things. But the key is, and you know this from your coaching work, that, telling somebody about something, saying, Sophia, when you make a decision, you need to understand your goals. You need to generate alternatives that match the goals. You need to clearly understand what the indicators are of success, and then weigh those to make a decision. That's the high level view of decision making. But telling Sophia that does not mean she will ever be able to put that into practice, because Sophia and everyone else requires the repetition and variation and personal coaching to really get the chops. And that's what our programs are geared to do. And that's really our mission in life, is to take these really life-changing ideas from Ralph and our other partners and put them into action so people can have better lives.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm sure you see in your work, it's so rewarding for them, and frankly for us, when you see people saying, something happened today that made my life better, and it only happened because I did the work to get good at this skill of decision making or managing my emotions, whatever it is. And I want to do more of it because it works.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we could even maybe label it habit, right? I mean, decision making has a lot of interwoven relationship to the habits that we have around how we've in the past made decisions, and being able to rewire that takes repetition, time, and in our world, we say even, some accountability can help as well. Right.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like you include a lot of those elements. Yeah, go ahead, Ralph.
I just wanted to add one quick thing to what I think's terrific about what Oji does is it's the feedback too on each thing. You have them work on decisions that aren't, the biggest in their lives at the beginning. Of course, you want to get the skills to do that, but you work on one of those, like where to have dinner this evening with a professional who I haven't met, or anyway, an important dinner. Just thinking about that for a little bit of time and coming up with a better alternative. If you then recognize it, I spent short time using ideas here and things worked out a lot better. Gee, that was worth it. And the feedback comes because of a lot of the practice too. And then there's the motivation to do a little bit more and developing the skills to use them on a little bit more complex decisions. And it's this exact same ideas over and over. I mean, Djokovic plays tennis using all the same skills that you or I would. We just don't quite have the skills he has on any of them.
Yeah, super.
Decision making's the same, and I think the Oji program helps greatly on that they get that feedback quickly, because it's the way it works.
With some coaching and guidance and repetition. Yeah. I love that. I love the concept. And I think it's the reason I do what I do is literally fundamentally largely a part of the same reason you guys do the same thing, which is I kind of ask myself what would make some of the biggest impact generationally in all aspects. And at the fundamental, most basic level, I actually think it's exactly what you guys are doing with decision making. I mean, if you can equip people with more effective decision making, it solves a lot of world issues long term.
Absolutely. Listen, I mean, the cumulative impact on a life of making 10 key decisions better is massive. How about 500 decisions better? Massive. The cumulative impact of being able to manage your emotions better and be able to read other people's emotions better over the course of a lifetime is massive. And so that's why we get out of bed every morning. I think Ralph is similarly inclined, and I sense that you are as well. And the key is that we fail people when we give them a 10-point list and say, here's how you should do this. And just follow this checklist and go do it. It's to keep using the tennis example, I often say, like, you can watch Roger Federer hit forehands on YouTube for half an hour. And in a certain way, you can say you have the information on how to hit the forehand. You have seen him hit hundreds of forehands, but you know that you can't hit a single forehand as well as him without practicing it thousands and thousands and thousands of times. There's no shortcut. So it's the same with reading one of these 10-point checklists of how to do it better, or reading some clickbait article online. That's great to get you interested. It's great to get you inspired. It serves an important function, but ultimately you've got to go do the work. And obviously you want the work to be engaging and fun and interesting and social. And that's the kind of stuff we focus on. But we really serve people poorly when we suggest that things are going to be better just because they have a little information about how to hit a forehand or how to make better decisions. You got to do the work. But then when you do, magical things happen, really.
100%. There's so many cross. We'll probably have to do a part 2 for today. It doesn't have to be immediate, but there's just a lot to unpack with these topics, and really everything that you guys teach, again, really correlates with the podcast and what the mission of the podcast is, which is to share best practice decision making from a lot of different people in a lot of different lines of work to give folks some principles to emulate in their own life, right? And but I think why not just understand the underpinnings for decision making, period, and put that into practice with a tool. So I think this is just a really valuable session and some great information that's packed into it. Although we've only scratched the surface, right? There's a whole book people can find. Give yourself a nudge, Ralph. This is the most recent of your published works, correct?
Yes, it is.
But if you want to delve all the way back to 1968, I think there's some white papers and articles people can find that you've written from your MIT days as well, right?
It would bore them to death, but yes, they could find
Matt, to get more info on the app or institutional work, they can visit you at Oji Life Lab, right?
Yep.
And Google that, or the website is it literally, I believe, I know you guys, so I'll put it in the show notes, but OjiLifeLab.com, is that?
Yep.
All right. You found the website with the direct name. That's excellent. As I was sitting here too, I think of, again, as I read the book and prep for the interview, thought of a lot of key moments in my life where an emulation of someone else's successful decision-making patterns was imprinted on me. And, quickly, I think of Spencer Hayes was the chairman of the board for our family of companies until he passed away about 4 years ago. But I would get some time with him over the years in building in our organization. And he was like a repetition machine. He would share the same stories over and over and over again to make a point. And one of the things he shared about his decision-making principle was a morning routine where he woke up, got in front of the mirror, and he'd say, Spencer, there are 2 types of people in the world. There are the people who are going to look at the weather, the economy, their spouse, and a million other reasons why they can't, and they're going to be right. And then there's going to be the people that find a way through around over any obstacle to accomplish their goal. And he said, I'd make myself make the decision of which kind of person I was going to be that day. And he said, I made plenty of excuses, but he said, Adam, that fundamental practice that I actually kept is one of the reasons I've built all the things that I've been managed to build. So I think of moments like that as really formative for many people. And I'm just sad we didn't get to some of those formative moments for the 2 of you. I know 2 interviews versus 1, you can't quite go as deep. So maybe we'll have to split them up and have you guys back on in the future so we can learn a little bit more about your experiences putting this stuff into practice as well. But I appreciate the time that you've carved out.
It's been great being with you, Adam. It's really fun. And I think it's great how you work with the podcast to expose different people and different lives and different lessons, because that is, as you said in your story just there, is one of the ways we learn this stuff is through watching other people and learning from other people who model constructive behavior. And so any chance to be around masters is fantastic.
Agreed. Yeah.
Roughly, what's your schedule going forward regarding this? I mean, it's very rough.
Yeah. Oh, in terms of release, or are we talking about?
Yeah, in terms of whatever you would know comes.
Yeah. In terms of releasing the episode, I'll Constanza will send an email giving you guys plenty of heads up on the publish date, probably in the next month for sure. It might be quite immediate because we've run out of some past episodes. So for publishing, and it'll go on both YouTube and Apple. Is that what you were asking, Ralph?
Yeah, just overview, because
yeah, we'll send an email out to you guys. I just have to coordinate that with the team. We've got to go through editing, but 2 weeks to 4 weeks we'll publish, and I'd say is kind of a good range to look for. And we'll give you plenty of heads up with all the links when we do, and then we send little snippets out on social as well, just little teasers for some of the sound bites from the interview. So cool. You'll get copied on all of that. Yeah, really enjoyed the interview, guys. And just real quick, I would, it's totally separate from Inside Great Minds, like to maybe have a conversation about product overlap and just seeing partner. I have a foster system in out of the whole country, even though I'm in Texas, it's in Marin County, where we're implementing. We're implementing.
That's where I am.
Individual coaching that's funded nonprofit for foster kids that are transitioning, and we're right in the middle of these conversations. And Oji, what you do with Oji, there's just so much overlap that I think there could be some real synergy for some of the work we're doing.
Well, Adam, I'm having chills here because the backstory that we did not get into is the first Oji Life Lab was a physical space in San Rafael, California for high school students.
Yeah.
And, for the sake of your podcast, really not relevant, but I really wanted to help high school age students with this stuff, and spent years building the center and opening it. And it just wasn't the right model for these kids in this community. Getting them to come into our place just didn't work. But the teens we did work with, it was really deeply meaningful. And I suspect your more one-on-one model is a much better match to that audience. Fortunately, it turns out our current approach is a good match for people in the workplace. So Thank goodness for that. But when you say, you're passionate about helping younger people, boy, do I get it. Cause, I spent years trying to figure that out. And if there's any way, even just through, sharing stories that I can be helpful, I'd be happy to do it.
That would be wonderful. I really think there's a reason for some of these things connecting. And so I will, I'll follow up with email, and we'll carve out some time, and I'll share a little bit more about, how we're structuring that. And then I'd love to learn, on a deeper level, a little bit more of the work that you guys are doing and how we could partner. So
sounds great.
Yeah. I too would be pleased to talk to you anytime, or I'll respond to whatever you sent.
I love it, Ralph. Yeah,
it's enjoyable.
Yeah, I need to make an excuse to get to Napa and Marin County just for personal reasons. So if I can coordinate that with a trip for a nonprofit and visiting with you guys, that'd be wonderful.
You can do it. It's just a decision. You just figure it out. And make it. All you got to do is make it good for you and good for who's ever in Marin and whoever's paying for it. Creating an alternative. I believe you can do it.
I'll write you a check for the decision-making coaching advice, Ralph. It's great. I love it. I got you in my ear now. Hey, appreciate you guys both for the time.
Thanks for the time, Adam. That was fun.
Have a great day.
Yeah, you do the same. You guys have a great
weekend.
Bye.
See ya, Ralph.